The morning sun cast long shadows across our family's century-old ranch as I pulled my pickup truck down the winding dirt road that had been our lifeline for generations. Little did I know that this peaceful Tuesday in late September would mark the beginning of a feud that would shake our small Texas community to its core and reveal truths about family, justice, and the unbreakable bonds that tie us to the land we call home. My name is Jake Morrison, and at 28, I'd recently returned to help run the Triple M Ranch after spending 6 years in the Army. The ranch had been in our family since 1923, when my great-grandfather Maxwell Morrison first staked his claim on these rolling hills dotted with mesquite trees and endless blue sky. Now, 4 generations later, it was home to me, my parents Tom and Sarah, and most importantly, my 82-year-old grandfather, Samuel Sam Morrison, a man whose weathered hands told stories of decades spent working this unforgiving but beautiful land. Grandpa Sam was what folks in these parts called old school. He believed in hard work, keeping your word, and treating your neighbors with respect, even when they didn't deserve it. His eyes, still sharp as a hawk's despite his age, had seen the ranch through droughts, floods, economic downturns, and everything else Mother Nature and life could throw at it. He was my hero, my mentor, and the strongest man I'd ever known, even as arthritis had begun to slow his once mighty frame. The trouble began 3 months earlier, when Karen Whitfield moved into the modern McMansion that had been built on what used to be part of the old Henderson property, about half a mile down our private road. The Hendersons had been good neighbors for 40 years before they decided to sell and retire to Florida. We'd all hoped whoever bought the place would understand the rural way of life, but Karen Whitfield was about as far from understanding as a person could get. Karen was a divorce attorney from Dallas who'd decided to escape the rat race and work remotely from what she called her countryside retreat. She was in her early 40s, drove a pristine white BMW, and seemed to view our ranch and the surrounding area as her personal playground, rather than the working agricultural operation it had always been. From day one, she made it clear that she had very different ideas about how things should be run. The first sign of trouble came when she complained to the county about our cattle occasionally wandering near the road. Never mind that we'd been running cattle on this land for a century, or that the road was clearly marked as private property. She wanted us to install expensive fencing to keep our smelly animals away from her scenic route to town. When we politely explained that this was a working ranch and that she'd bought property on a private ranch road, she threatened to sue us for creating a public nuisance. Then came the complaints about our farm equipment. Apparently, the sight of our tractors, hay balers, and cattle trucks ruined her pastoral view. She actually had the audacity to suggest we build a separate access road so our industrial machinery wouldn't disturb her morning yoga sessions on her back deck. When my father calmly explained that we'd been using this road since before she was born and had every legal right to continue doing so, she rolled her eyes and muttered something about backwards country people who don't understand progress. But the real breaking point came on that Tuesday morning in September. I was heading out to check on our cattle in the far pasture when I found our ranch road, the same road that had been maintained by our family for decades, completely blocked by an enormous pile of gravel. Not just a little gravel, mind you, but a mountain of the stuff, at least 6 feet high and 20 feet across, making it impossible for any vehicle to pass. I sat in my truck for a moment, staring at this obstruction in disbelief. This road was our lifeline to the outside world. Our cattle trucks used it to transport livestock to market. Our hay suppliers used it to deliver feed during the winter months. Emergency vehicles needed access to reach our property. And now someone had just blocked it? With gravel? I climbed out of my truck and walked around the pile, looking for any clue about how it had gotten there. That's when I spotted the delivery receipt half buried under some of the stones. It was from Henderson. County Gravel and Sand, and the delivery address was listed as Karen Whitfield's property. The order was for 15 tons of premium road gravel, and it had been delivered at 6 a.m. that morning, clearly timed for when our family would still be having breakfast and wouldn't notice the delivery truck. My blood began to boil as the reality of the situation hit me. This wasn't an accident or a mistake. This was a deliberate act of sabotage designed to prevent us from using our own road. Karen had actually ordered 15 tons of gravel to be dumped on our private property, effectively imprisoning us on our own land. I pulled out my phone and called my father. "Dad, you need to see this," I said, trying to keep the anger out of my voice. "Karen's gone too far this time." 20 minutes later, both my parents and Grandpa Sam arrived in Dad's old Ford. The look on Grandpa's face when he saw that pile of gravel was something I'll never forget. His jaw tightened, his eyes narrowed, and for a moment I could see the young man who'd built this ranch with his bare hands and wasn't about to let anyone, especially some city lawyer, push his family around. "Well, I'll be damned," he said quietly, which was about as close to swearing as Grandpa ever got. In all my years, I've never seen such a low-down, sneaky thing. My mother, ever the peacekeeper, suggested we call Karen and try to resolve the situation diplomatically. "Maybe there's been some misunderstanding," she said hopefully. "Perhaps she intended for it to be delivered to her property and there was a mix-up with the address." But Grandpa shook his head slowly. "Sarah, honey, there's no misunderstanding. Here. Look at where that gravel's placed, right at the narrowest part of the road where it would cause the most trouble. This was calculated, and it was meant to hurt us." Dad was already on his phone with the gravel company, and the conversation confirmed our worst fears. The delivery had been specifically ordered to be placed at the entrance to the ranch road, to prevent unauthorized access. Karen had actually told the delivery driver that she owned the entire road and wanted to block it to keep trespassers off her property. That's when I realized just how cunning Karen's plan really was. By claiming the road was hers and that we were trespassers, she was setting up a legal scenario where she could argue she had the right to block access. Never mind that our family had been using this road since 1923, or that we had clear property deeds and easement rights. She was betting that her legal background would intimidate us into backing down. But she didn't know Samuel Morrison. Grandpa walked slowly around the gravel pile, his weathered hands clasped behind his back, studying it from every angle like a general surveying a battlefield. Finally, he stopped and looked at each of us in turn. "I've been patient with this woman," he said in that calm, measured tone that meant he was deadly serious. "I've tried to be neighborly. I've overlooked her complaints and her demands and her threats. But this," he gestured at the gravel pile, "this is an act of war against our family and our livelihood." "What are you thinking, Dad?" my father asked, though I could tell from his expression that he was thinking the same thing we all were. Grandpa's eyes twinkled with something that wasn't quite mischief, but wasn't quite anger either. "I'm thinking that if Mrs. Whitfield wants to play games with gravel, then we should give her all the gravel she can handle." Over the next hour, we developed what would later become known throughout Henderson County as the Great Gravel Caper. First, Dad called our lawyer to confirm our legal rights to the road. We had them in spades. Then Mom called the sheriff's office to report the illegal dumping on our property. But it was Grandpa's suggestion that would make this a story people would tell for generations. "Jake," he said, turning to me with that same twinkle in his eyes, "how much gravel do you figure is in that pile?" I walked around it again, estimating. 15 tons, according to the receipt. Maybe a little more. "And how long do you think it would take us to move all that gravel with the front-end loader?" I thought about it. Our John Deere front-end loader could move about half a ton at a time. Maybe 4 or 5 hours working steady. Grandpa nodded slowly. "And where do you think would be the most appropriate place to put all that gravel once we've moved it?" That's when I understood exactly what my grandfather was planning, and I couldn't help but grin. "I think Mrs. Whitfield's trunk might be a good place to start." The beauty of Grandpa's plan wasn't just in its poetic justice, it was in its perfect legality. The gravel had been illegally dumped on our property, making it our responsibility to remove it. As the injured party, we had every right to charge Karen for the cost of removal and disposal. And since she'd made it clear that she was the one who'd ordered the gravel, the most logical place to return it was to her property. But Grandpa's plan went deeper than simple revenge. He understood that Karen was counting on us to back down, to be intimidated by her legal threats and her aggressive tactics. By responding with calm, calculated action and involving the sheriff from the beginning, he was going to turn her own strategy against her. The key, he explained as we prepared, to implement our plan is to do everything by... The next morning dawned crisp and clear, with that particular quality of light that makes everything in Texas look like it's been painted by God himself. By 7 a.m., we had our battle plan in motion. Dad had called Sheriff Martinez the night before to give him a heads up about our gravel removal operation, and the sheriff, who'd known our family for 20 years, had agreed to swing by around noon to oversee the proceedings and make sure everything stayed legal. What we didn't expect was for Karen to show up at 8 a.m. just as I was making my first pass with the front-end loader. She came roaring down the road in her pristine BMW, music blasting, completely oblivious to the fact that half of her gravel pile was already gone. I watched in the rearview mirror of the loader as she slammed on her brakes, her car skidding to a stop just feet from where I was working. The look on her face when she realized what we were doing was absolutely priceless. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" she screamed, jumping out of her car in her designer workout clothes and expensive running shoes that had clearly never seen actual dirt before. I shut off the loader and climbed down, taking my time, just like Grandpa had taught me. "Morning, Mrs. Whitfield," I said politely, tipping my hat. "Beautiful day, isn't it? We're just cleaning up this mess someone left on our property." "That's my gravel," she shrieked, her face turning an interesting shade of purple. "You can't just take it." "Well, ma'am," I replied, pulling the delivery receipt from my shirt pocket. "According to this document, you had it dumped on our private property without permission. That makes it illegal dumping, and as the property owners, we're obligated to clean it up." Karen snatched the receipt from my hands, her eyes scanning it frantically. I could see the exact moment she realized her mistake. She'd been so focused on blocking our road that she hadn't paid attention to exactly where the property lines were. The gravel had been dumped a good 50 feet onto our side of the boundary. This is theft," she sputtered. "I'm calling the police." "Already did," came Grandpa's voice from behind her. He'd been watching the whole exchange from the porch of our old farmhouse, and now he walked over with that slow, deliberate pace that meant business. "Sheriff Martinez will be here around noon. I'm sure he'll be very interested to hear about how you illegally dumped 15 tons of gravel on our property." Karen's face went from purple to white in about 3 seconds. As a lawyer, she knew exactly how much trouble she was in. Illegal dumping was a serious offense in Texas, especially when it blocked access roads to agricultural properties. She could face hefty fines, cleanup costs, and even criminal charges. But what happened next changed everything. As Karen stood there frantically trying to figure out her next move, a beaten-up pickup truck came rattling down the road from the direction of town. It was moving fast, too fast for our narrow gravel road, and as it approached Karen's BMW, I realized the driver wasn't going to be able to stop in time. "Look out!" I shouted, but it was too late. The pickup truck slammed into the back of Karen's BMW with a tremendous crash, sending both vehicles spinning. Karen was thrown to the ground, and I heard her cry out in pain as she hit the dirt hard. The driver of the pickup, a young man I didn't recognize, stumbled out of his truck, blood streaming from a cut on his forehead. "Oh God," he kept repeating, swaying on his feet. I couldn't stop. The brakes. Then he collapsed. Everything that had seemed so important just moments before, the gravel, the property dispute, the principle of the thing, suddenly became insignificant. Grandpa was already moving, faster than I'd seen him move in years, pulling his cell phone out of his pocket. "Jake, check on the boy," he barked. "Sarah, get the first aid kit from the house. Tom, help me with Mrs. Whitfield." The next 30 minutes were a blur of emergency vehicles, paramedics, and controlled chaos. The young man, who turned out to be named Danny Martinez, Sheriff Martinez's nephew, had fallen asleep at the wheel after pulling a double shift at the oil refinery. He was banged up but not seriously injured. Karen, however, had a broken wrist and several nasty cuts from hitting the gravel when she fell. As the paramedics worked on both victims, Sheriff Martinez arrived ahead of schedule, his face grim when he saw his nephew being loaded into an ambulance. "Tom, Sam," he said, nodding to my father and grandfather. Tell me what happened here." Grandpa laid out the whole story: the gravel dumping, our cleanup operation, the accident. He showed the sheriff the delivery receipt, explained about the property boundaries, and made it clear that while we were within our rights to remove the gravel, the last thing we'd wanted was for anyone to get hurt. Sheriff Martinez listened to everything, took notes, and then did something that surprised all of us. He walked over to where Karen was sitting in the back of the second ambulance, her wrist in a temporary cast, and had a long, quiet conversation with her. I couldn't hear what they were saying, but I could see Karen's expression changing from angry to confused to something that looked almost like shame. After about 10 minutes, the sheriff came back over to us. "Mrs. Whitfield wants to speak with you, Sam," he said. "All of you, actually." We walked over to the ambulance, and Karen looked up at us with tears in her eyes. The fight had gone out of her completely, and for the first time since she'd moved to our neighborhood, she looked like a real person instead of an adversary. "I owe you an apology," she said quietly. "All of you. What you just did. Rushing to help Danny and me after the way I've treated you. I don't deserve that kind of kindness." Grandpa stepped forward, his weathered hand gentle on her shoulder. "Anyone would have done the same, Mrs. Whitfield. That's what neighbors do." "No," she said, shaking her head. "No, that's not true. I've been horrible to you people. I've complained and threatened and tried to make your lives miserable, and when I was lying there hurt, your whole family dropped everything to help me. Why?" Grandpa was quiet for a long moment, looking out across the land that had been his home for more than 80 years. When he finally spoke, his voice was soft but clear. "Because that's who we are," he said simply. "And because I suspect that's who you are too, underneath all that anger and frustration. You didn't move out here to be our enemy, Mrs. Whitfield. You moved out here to find something you were missing in the city, maybe some peace, some connection to something real. Am I right?" Karen broke down completely then, sobbing like a child. Through her tears, she told us the real story, how her divorce had been brutal and ugly, how she'd lost custody of her kids to her ex-husband, how she'd moved to the country hoping to start over, but had been so angry and hurt that she'd lashed out at everyone around her. "I saw your family," she said, looking at each of us through her tears, "and I was jealous. You have everything I lost. 3 generations working together, taking care of each other, belonging somewhere. And instead of trying to be part of that, I tried to tear it down because it hurt too much to see what I didn't have." The twist that nobody saw coming, not even Grandpa with all his wisdom, was that Karen's ex-husband had been feeding her lies about us. He was a big-shot Dallas developer who'd been quietly buying up rural properties to turn into subdivisions, and he'd specifically targeted our area because of its scenic beauty and proximity to the lake. He'd been using Karen as an unwitting weapon, encouraging her complaints and legal threats in hopes of forcing us to sell our land.
"He told me you were trying to drive down property values so you could buy my place cheap," Karen admitted. "He said you were probably running some kind of scam, that rural people like you always had angles. He kept pushing me to make trouble."
"For you saying it would protect my investment." Sheriff Martinez whistled low. "That's a serious accusation, Mrs. Whitfield. Do you have any proof of this?" Karen nodded, pulling out her phone with her good hand. "Text messages, emails, recorded phone calls where he coached me on what complaints to file. I kept everything. Because I'm a lawyer and I document everything. I just never thought about what I was really doing. As the truth came out, I felt my anger at Karen transform into something else, pity, and a strange kind of respect. She'd been manipulated and used, turned into a weapon against us by someone who saw our land as nothing more than dollar signs. And when the moment of truth came, when she was hurt and vulnerable, she'd chosen honesty over pride. But Grandpa wasn't done with his surprises yet. "Sheriff," he said, "I'd like to drop any charges against Mrs. Whitfield for the illegal dumping. Seems to me she's been punished enough, and she wasn't acting entirely on her own." "Grandpa," I started to protest, but he held up a hand. "However," he continued, his eyes twinkling with that familiar mischief, "I do think we should still deliver that gravel to her property. After all, she paid for it, and it's good quality stuff. Might come in handy for fixing her driveway after this accident." Karen stared at him in amazement. "You're not," You're not going to press charges? After everything I've done? Mrs. Whitfield, Grandpa said, in my 82 years, I've learned that the best way to defeat an enemy is to turn them into a friend. Besides, he added with a grin, your ex-husband sounds like the real problem here, and something tells me Sheriff Martinez is going to want to have a long conversation with him about fraud and conspiracy. Share.